Well, I was trying to figure out how we were going to entice a group to come this early in the morning, and now I know it was breakfast, and we need to do that more often. It reminds me, a few years ago was asked to speak at an assembly in Canton, and it was it was for the whole high school, and it was 8 in the morning, and all these kids come in and immediately slump down in their chairs. And I'm thinking to myself, how in the world am I going to get their attention? Also, I immediately felt like I was at a religious retreat because everybody's head was down, and I thought they were praying, but actually they were texting to each other. So I had to come up with some sort of a way to get their attention. And I said, okay, here's the deal. We're going to talk for 30 minutes. And here's my promise. Every 5 minutes, I will take off another piece of clothing. And if you stay awake, at the end, I will be standing here in my underwear. And I took my jacket off, and they all started clapping. And so little by little, I took off one shoe, and so I didn't have to take off too much. So no exposing myself for this group, but it worked on that day. But Diane asked me if I would come in and speak this morning. And you know, any of these people that come and speak at events really enjoy listening to themselves talk, so I jumped at the opportunity. And so, you know, what should we talk about today? And we will have a Q&A, and I hope you'll ask some questions that would, you know, maybe resonate with you, or why do you have such a big ego that you think you should be talking to us at 7:30 in the morning? But really, one of the things I thought we could touch on today is what is or are the keys to success? How do companies, organizations, sporting teams, what makes them successful? And everybody's, you know, exploring this topic, looking for the silver bullet, the magic. How does it happen? What makes success? And really, the overarching topic or the overarching factor that makes organizations successful are relationships. When you get right down to it, if you can create a spider web of connectedness, so that the people in your employ genuinely feel like you care, and you can get them to reach a place where they care about each other and the organization, maybe even more importantly than they care about their own personal accomplishments, that organization will be successful. Now, the jockey that wins the race is sitting on the fastest horse in the race. There's no magic to that. So you have to hire good people. You've got to have good people around you. And good means, in my mind, talented and character large. You've got to hire people that are character large. What would they do when nobody is watching? Are they willing to take small but calculated risks to grow the organization or the program? And are you there as its manager and team leader to help them learn as they go? You shouldn't be afraid of failure. You shouldn't be afraid of mistakes. It's through those things that learning occurs that allows something to be successful later. So one, hire character large people, and you then need to free them up to fly. And then when they fail, great. Get right in there with your magnifying glass, put your arm around them and say, let's figure this out. What happened here? How can we do this better the next time around? And then you really start to see incremental improvement in all of your people's performance. So when we started this project 8 years ago, we decided to write a book. And I'd never written a real book before. I wrote a how-to in tennis, which my mother bought it, but that was, and my mother didn't play tennis, but she loved her son so much, little Italian woman that she was. So this was our first undertaking to write something, and we decided, well, maybe we'll write a how-to book. Well, nobody's going to buy that. Or maybe we'll do the second iteration of The Art of War by Sun Tzu, which was the most successful book in history after the Bible. And but nobody was going to listen to me talk about philosophy and samurai warriors and that sort of thing. So we came up with the idea that we were going to use squash as a vehicle. And this really isn't a book about squash, but to use squash as a vehicle to convey messages, life messages. And the primary message that we decided to try to look into and expose is this concept of fear. And it's interesting because in the years since the book came out, I see a dramatic uptick in fear in the workplace, in our lives. Life is becoming more unpredictable every single day. And it's learning how to manage that. For an example, in 3 weeks, I have to take the US team to the Men's World Championships in Cairo. And for the last week, we've been talking about, do we make this trip? Is it safe to go to Cairo? We're talking to the government. We're trying to make the most intelligent decision we can based on the facts that we have in front of us. And ultimately, what we've had to do is to say to the team, this is a very personal decision. We're going to send a team. If you personally don't feel like you want to make that trip, that's fine. But in this macho, testosterone-driven world of sport, if you're the wimp that wimps out, then that's not a good thing. And so we're trying to protect the player or players that don't want to make the trip to Cairo for very personal reasons, because they don't like us there, or at least a few people don't like us there. So the fear thing is very important. So how did we stumble upon this concept of running to the roar? Well, I see a shrink once a week in Windsor. And he basically said to me one day, you're the most avoidant person I've ever met. You will avoid conflict at all cost. Imagine that. I'm a coach. I take my team into battle twice a week, and I avoid conflict at all cost. And I am absolutely the Lion in the Wizard of Oz. I'm afraid of my own shadow. I've given away 2 houses as a result. I just don't like conflict. But he said, I'm going to tell you a story. And the story is entitled Run to the Roar. And run to the roar, in psychological terms, is essentially go at the problem. And where this comes from is that in Africa, lions hunt in packs. True story. And they take with them the oldest female of the pride. By this point, she can't catch her own food. She's infirmed, blind, toothless, but she has the deepest roar of the pride. And what they do is they position her in the middle of a field facing the bush. And all the other lionesses hide in the bush. And when she roars, what do the prey do? They run away from the roar to their death. But if they went at the problem, they would find out it's a toothless old lady. Well, this is what we need to do in our day-to-day lives and in the workplace, is to get people to understand, go at the problem. Don't be afraid of it. And you will find invariably that you've created on a subliminal level a bigger monster than really exists. And so what I ask my players every day is, what's the worst that can happen? So what's the worst that can happen? If you ask that rhetorical question of yourself, you'll be able to start to see that, I'm being irrational here. But when you're dealing with college-age people, they don't even know what's happening. It's so deep-rooted in their core. And so until we develop a relationship where they really trust me, when the first time I say, what's the worst that can happen, they don't have an answer. And then I ask it again and again and again. And then all of a sudden, I start to see this transformative kind of thinking, and they uncork. And this is the worst that could happen. I can't call my father and tell him that I failed that test. Or I can't call him and tell him that my car got towed last night by Whitey's and it's going to cost another $150. And then when you start to talk through these things, the light goes on and it's like, oh my gosh, that's really not so bad. That's not the worst thing that could ever happen. And then they become a little more courageous. One of the interesting sidebars to that was when we started on this book. And this book was a very interesting, we could talk for hours just about that, and I won't bore you with it, because it was very interesting writing a book of this magnitude. This book is now being made into a movie. Last week I was sitting on the couch with my wife and my phone rang. And I said, hello? And he said, hey, Coach A. I said, yeah. He said, this is Matt. I said, Matt who? Matt Damon. I said, oh, hi, how you doing? And my wife looked at me, she said, I don't even know you. And I think I might want to produce your movie and that kind of thing. But if it ever gets made, I'll believe it when I see it. But it's an interesting thing to go through a process like that. And so the whole reason this book really happened is that Tom Wolfe got involved. And Tom Wolfe's son played for us at Trinity. And so when he graduated, Tom said to me, Coach, And I love Tom Wolfe. I mean, he is the quirkiest bird, all dressed in white. And his son looked at Yale. John Burns is here. His son was the captain of the squash team at Yale. He looked at Yale and Trinity, and Yale kind of dropped the ball a little bit. We gobbled it up. Then Yale came back, but it was too late. And so he said, well, you need to write a book. So I'm going to have somebody call you. I'm going to get you an agent, because that's the hardest thing to do. And all of a sudden one day I'm sitting in my office and the phone rings. Is Coach A? I said, yes. This is David Black. I said, okay. And I'd like to agent your book. Now, never having done this before, I'm thinking to myself, well, why would I let you be my book agent? And he said, well, that's a very good question. I am the agent for Mitch Albom, Tuesdays with Morrie, who spoke at the JCC, and Dan Brown of the Da Vinci Code. And I said, oh, I think you can be my agent. And then the next thing you know, now we have a publishing company. And then this thing runs away. And one day I get a phone call from the Adrian Zackheim at Penguin Books, and he says, Coach, we have a little problem. I said, all right, what's that? He said, well, your book has been, the title of your book has been used before. And I said, well, so what does that mean? He said, well, the good news is you can't copyright a title. I said, oh, that's cool. So, but just out of interest's sake, who used my title? And it was Tammy Faye Baker. So, everywhere I go, I wear a lot of makeup and rouge, and so I can hit each audience a little bit differently. But so that's how we dove into this book, and it really is about learning how to manage fear. On the first day of practice around the country, most coaches sit down and they strategize with their teams and they goal set. What are we going to do as a team? What are we going to do individually? We don't do that. On our first day of practice, we sit down and I ask them, what are you afraid of? Let's get that hump off your back. What are you afraid of? What's holding you back? What's holding you down? And this world has changed dramatically. In this Gen X community that we're living in, when these young people come to us now, they look more put together than they've ever looked before. They look and present beautifully. And the first time they face adversity, they fall into a million pieces. Because in the name of love, we as parents are not giving our children ownership over their own journeys. We've not shown them the important lessons that it's okay to fail. It's okay to be human. Learn from it. But we don't do that now. It's in a completely different paradigm. And so they come afraid of all of those things, which are all natural parts of learning and growing up. We're seeing more cheating in college today than we've ever seen before. Why? Can't fail. I talked to my team about that. I said, guys, you wouldn't cheat on the squash court. You would never even think of that. No, that would be weak. But you'll cheat on an English test. If the accurate outcome, the measure of your knowledge of that subject matter is an F, you should take that and learn from it. But they can't. And they're all ADHD diagnosed, and they're on, Adderall, and, little Johnny can't be human. It's amazing. I try to help people into colleges around the country, and I'll have a family come in from Greenwich. I like to pick on Greenwich. And I'll say, okay, SATs are a little weak, grades are scattered. What's your first choice? Yale. What's your second choice? Princeton. What's your safety school? Cornell. What's your reality? I mean, talk about, running away from the roar. You're setting your child, and this poor kid is sitting there, and the parents are doing all the talking. It's insane what's going on out there. But at any rate, to me, success in life comes from, one, surround yourself with good people. Make sure their character large. I use that phrase a lot, but I've had people in my program that were character small, and it destroys the organization. And one of the things that my boss at West Point told me was hire great people. Know that you will not be able to keep them, but you'll always have great people. You hire monkeys, you have them forever, but what do you have? And so this whole thing in the corporate world about retention, why are we so hepped up on retention? Because we don't want to have to bother training another person. Train great people. Keep good people in. That's number one. Number two, create relationships in that organization. so that they genuinely know that you care about them. And that changes everything. Walk into a person's office and look at the pictures on their wall. They're on that wall for a reason. That's important to that person. Ask them about that. Oh, it looks like your daughter's into horseback riding. How old is she now? What is she doing now? Stay in touch with that person. Continue to use that as a central talking point. And you'll be amazed at how people will start to bond together and care about each other. And when that happens, then they become incredibly productive in the workplace. Because there are days when we come to work and we're just not on our A game. Oh, I think I just want to hide at my desk and schlep through the day. But you know what? My colleague over here is working hard, and he's working hard. I can't let them down. It lifts you up. It helps you become more engaged in that awesome power of the moment, every moment of the day, so that you do a better job. So it's all around relationships. Imagine what I have to do in terms of building relationships. This year we have 14 different countries represented in the program. We have a boy from Pakistan hitting on court with a boy from India. Their parents are not talking to each other. And I've got to somehow get them to put all of that aside and to care more about each other than they care about themselves. So on the first day of practice, basically what I do is I say, guys, these are your brothers. You were not the person that chose your teammates, I was, but these are your brothers, and you have to care about them. You really do. And it takes a while, but ultimately it's amazing to see these relationships. And they're for a lifetime. And I find it very interesting to see when the parents come and visit, they're like, whoa, what's going on in here? This is foreign to me, in many ways. But it's what works. It's what works. I also believe in seniority. I believe in rite of passage. I believe in loyalty. I always show more loyalty to my seniors. On the first day, I have the freshmen stand up and announce their names and where they're from. I then tell them to sit down, and then I tell them, now that is the last time I expect to hear from you for the rest of the year. You're a freshman, you are the lowest form of life on earth, you've done nothing, and I don't want to hear from you again. And these are prideful young people that have come from environments where they were told they're the best, you're the best in everything. Well, you may be when you're a senior, but you're not the best as a freshman. And that rite of passage really, and it exists in every workplace, but it's important. It's important to the concept of a team and a family where your senior leadership have earned their spot. They've earned their stripes, and it's their program. A coach doesn't determine the chemistry of a program. It's the players that do, and it's the leaders that do. They determine that chemistry. We can screw it up. They make it. And that seniority concept and having your leaders run the show really is the difference maker. So before I open it up for Q&A, I think I'll end with a humorous story because I'm sure by now you're thinking, wow, what an ego. So one of the things that I have found in my journey is it's very easy to start to get caught up and start to believe that you're really special. You're talking to people that drove in here with nicer cars than you, they have more degrees than you. So I like to just look at the irony of life. And through the irony of life, it keeps me very grounded and humble. Because there's so many ironic things that happen in a day that just force you to laugh at yourself and not take yourself that seriously. And I think that's a very good quality to have. So in 2002, I was selected as the U.S. Olympic Coach of the Year. Why? Because I'm so damn special. And the next day, I got a phone call from the Red Sox. And they said, how would you like to come out and throw out the first pitch at Fenway? And my thinking was, I can't think of a more deserving guy than that, me to throw out the first pitch at Fenway. So of course I'll accept your offer. We'll bring the team up to Fenway. We'll give out the national championship rings on the field. It'll be a great day. It'll be a really special treat for the fans to be able to see me throw out the first pitch. Well, at this point, my daughter is a sophomore at Trinity. And word gets out on campus that, hey, Coach A's throwing out the first pitch. And so the kids are coming up to me and they're saying, are you practicing throwing? Are you loosening up your arm? And I'm like, 60 feet, 6 inches, I can do this in my sleep. Of course not. Well, my daughter and her sorority sisters bought tickets in the bleachers. Why? Because they didn't want me to see how drunk they were getting at the ball game. So the day arrives, a really cold day in New England. We get on the bus. We're driving up to Fenway Park. My daughter, they've already pre-gamed. They're hammered in the bleachers. And now it's my moment in the sun. What a deserving guy. So I get on the field, and I'm looking around, and you know what? These are my peeps. This is where I belong. Jason Varitek, he's a house. He's so big. Nomar Garciaparra's forearms are bigger than my legs. There's Kurt Schilling, he's 6'11". There's his wife, she's a smoke show. This is where I belong. This is exactly where I belong. So they're throwing the ball around, and when it goes through the air, it actually whistles. That's how hard they're throwing it. When it hits the glove, it makes a really loud pop. But that's okay, my moment. The woman comes over, hands me my ceremonial baseball, gold lettering, Paul Assaiante, squash god. This is great. She said, okay, you're going to stand on the first base line for the national anthem, and then you're going to go out and throw out the first pitch. I said, that's great. So here I am, surrounded by all of my obviously my fans, and it's the longest rendition of the national anthem in the history of man, so that by the end of the game, I'm shivering, and I'm actually shaking, and it's a brand new baseball. And if you've ever held on to a brand new baseball, it's very slick. And then the moment arrives that these fans have been waiting for. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is echoing off the Green Monster. I jog out to the mound. This is great. I look 60 feet 6 inches away. There's Jason Varitek. I'm thinking to myself, curveball, slider, I don't know, but I'm bringing the heat, that's for sure. Well, at this moment, my drunk daughter and her girlfriend start chanting my name. And of course, I'm going to wave to the small people. So as I turn to wave to them, there I am on the big screen TV, 90 feet tall. It's at this moment that I realize this is not going to be the best day of my life. I look back to home plate, and it's now a mile away. And I can't find Jason Varitek. At this moment, I get struck by this mysterious disease, and my left arm shrivels. And the ball is stuck in my hand, and I can't quite get it, but somehow I get this ball out of my hand, which bounces 7 times and literally stops in a mud puddle in front of Jason Varitek. He picks up the ball, runs out to the mound, and says, nice pitch, coach. He hands me this muddy orb, and I can't get off the field fast enough. And as I'm running through the box seats of all these drunk Bostonians, one guy pats me on the butt and says, that's a great pitch, coach. U.S. squash. What the hell is squash? Well, I've since thrown out the ball 9 more times, and the second time that I threw it out, Mrs. Assaiante didn't raise a stupid boy. So I got on the mound, and I beckoned for Varitek to come a little closer, and he did. And somehow I got the ball all the way to his glove. And as I got off the field, the second I got off the field, my cell phone rang, and it was my father, and he said, son, I'm so proud of you. But if that man was any closer to you, you could have handed him the ball. So, at any rate, you stayed all awake, and I didn't have to take off any of my clothes, which I really do appreciate. But please, any questions or comments that you might have? You have to stay for 3, so you're going to have to speak. Anybody have any questions?
And I have a microphone here so everyone
Okay.
can hear the questions. So, yes, Michelle.
You mentioned that you talk about character. You mentioned that you talk about surround yourself with. I'm not going to get your terminology exactly. Character large. What does that mean for you? Like, how do you define character large?
Well, for me, my definition is the question is, how do you define character large people? To me, again, it's what would you do if nobody was watching? Will they do the right thing always? Because if they're not, if they're going to cut a corner, if they're going to fudge on an expense report or whatever, it starts to dilute the whole thing. The hard thing is coming up with a hiring mechanism that can locate character large people. So I'm a consultant for a car dealership in New Jersey, Miller Motors, and they brought me down to discuss how do you test and find character large people. What I do in my business is we have a scoreboard every day. And so I talk to the opponents of, or the coaches of the opponents of the people that I'm recruiting, because they're going to tell the truth. Tell me about Joe. What kind of a kid is he? How does he handle himself on the field? What kind of a citizen is he off the courts? Because his coach is going to tell me he's the greatest thing since vanilla ice cream. You've got to have a mechanism to do that and find just stand-up people that will walk into your office and say, I blew it. I made a mistake, and not try to hide the fact, and then boom, you're off to the races with that. And because it's an imperfect science, again, while everybody's hung up on retention, I think you try to empower your people, give them an opportunity to fly. When they fail, help them. When they fail again, help them. But if they become just inept or divisive in any way, then it becomes addition by subtraction. Go find another character large person, because the world is full of them.
Coach, could you talk about how you handled the situation when, could you tell us about how you handled the situation when, I think it was in 2010 or 2011, when down at Yale, when your number one had a confrontation with Yale's number one?
Yeah, so the question is, I've spent my whole life trying to get squash to be a more visible sport. And, and be careful for what you wish for. There was a moment where one of my players lost his cool on the court. It was on match ball. He won the point. He turned and he emitted a primal scream in the face of his opponent. And what looked so bad about it is that my guy was 6'5" and his opponent was 5'6". So it was this very, very physical kind of a confrontation. No punches were thrown, nothing like that, but it just looked horrendous. This was somehow released to ESPN. And they thought it was hysterical. It's sort of like, there was a fight at a polo game. Let's put that on television. This is squash. It's a genteel sport. It's not supposed to happen. And so they just were having a great time with it, and they released it onto ESPN. And it was getting thousands and thousands of hits. And they said, well, this is great. Let's just keep this thing going. And it was on for an entire week. It became one of ESPN's top 10 worst moments of the year at the end of the year. And our president went nuts. Called me into his office, put his finger in my chest, said I've fired people for less. Our boy lost his temper. This is a teachable moment. I got over 500 emails calling for my resignation. I got an email from a Yale parent which said that when a fish dies, it stinks from the head down. I saved that. I thought that was pretty creative. So somehow that was my fault. The former president of Trinity called me up and said, the kid lost his cool. Get over it. But I learned a lot in that moment, and I think we all did. This young man got married on Sunday in New York. We went down to the Mandarin Oriental for his wedding. He married this lovely woman from Pakistan, 250 guests. I don't know why he needed financial aid when he came to Trinity. I couldn't figure that out. But what a gorgeous event. But it was a real shocker. Never give away control. Never. So that was a moment where he lost himself, and that was a character small action. But it was a teachable moment. Unfortunately, the following weekend, we were about to host the national championships. He was going to win that national championship because he was undefeated all season, which would have given him his 7th national championship. 4 team and 3 singles, making him the winningest player in history. And I was told that he needed to be pulled out of the tournament. And that was brutal because I lost my team. They said, Coach, why are you not fighting for him? He didn't do anything. He lost his cool. And there were many things that happened in that match that led to that moment. There was a lot of chirping going on in there, which nobody will ever know about. But I had to pull him out of the tournament, and it was devastating. And I lost my team that year. They just felt that I turned my back on our guy. And so it was hard. But again, Sunday, he asked me to speak at his wedding. And it was fun because I got up, this monstrous thing, and I grabbed this book, and it was the first time I met his wife, Arouge, and I said, Arouge, I'm going to give you this as a wedding present. One, because I'm cheap, but also because Basit is so humble that you don't even know that this book exists. But chapter 9 in this book is Basit Chowdhury, and the chapter is entitled Character. So he was a character large kid, but he was a kid, and he lost his cool. And it was, you can't believe the amount of noise we heard for that. So how did I handle it? Not very well. One more question.
So
So there are times where we don't have the luxury of choosing our teams and we'll have to work with character small folks for a period of time. How do you make the best of that situation, and how do you motivate those people when they're still an integral part of your team?
That's a great question. So how do you motivate character small people? Well, I think if you have a character small person, get rid of them. But if you have a person that maybe is not a real achiever, or maybe is working on, full pistons, but it's not good enough, then you've got to find a way to get the most out of them. So if you've got a person that's working on a 70% level compared to the rest of the team, get 100% of that 70. At least get them to be as productive as they humanly can be. Embrace them into the family. Make sure that they feel like they're a part of it. Get everybody else in the team to support that. But if it becomes an anchor that you've got around your neck as you're swimming across the lake, then you've got to talk to your supervisors and say, look, we've got to find someone else, or find something else for this person to do in the organization that's not so key. We all face it, and we all work with people that we don't care for, or who don't, or checking in and checking out, that kind of thing. But really, if we could all function at the highest level we are capable of day in and day out, it's pretty good. My guess is you may be dealing with a person who is not really working as hard as they can, or not as fully engaged in the moment as they should be. And so you need to pull that person aside and say, look, how can I help you? I love that. What can I do for you? How can I make your experience better? Are you having fun? Is this something you enjoy? Is there something going on at home? How can I lighten your load? And try to get that person to be the best version of themselves they can be. You'll get more out of that person that way. And that's also true for ourselves. We'll go to work, we've got the flu, we had a fight with our wife last night, or whatever it is, and you're really not your best self. Well, get 100% out of that. Still give the best you have, because that's what you're getting paid to do. People are relying on you. It's an opportunity, it's an honor, and it's a privilege to be in the employ of UConn. Get the best out of that person. But I would do it first with love and caring. It's interesting, I know I've gone over my time, but my neighbor at West Point was Mike Krzyzewski. And I went to one of his practices, and 5 minutes into practice, he was a raging lunatic, throwing things and F-bombs, and he threw him out of the gym. So that night I went over for our nightly Diet Coke, and I said, Mike, what set you off today? And he said, what do you mean? I said, well, you were nuts in there. And he said, no, I scheduled this 2 weeks ago. I knew I needed to get their attention. So that was his management style. He used the sledgehammer, which was because he was coached by Bobby Knight, so that's what he knew. If I did that, they'd laugh at me. I'm not a yeller. I'm not a screamer. But you need a sledgehammer. So my sledgehammer is guilt. That's what I was raised on. So I'll sit the team down when I need to get their attention, and I'll say, look at those banners. I mean, I can't believe you care so little about the history of this place. I can't believe you care so little about me that you would just check in and check. Now get out of here. And before they leave the gym, I have 50 text messages. Sorry, coach, I'll come ready for practice tomorrow. So whatever way you can motivate that person to be the best version of themselves, you've been successful. And then you've got to make an evaluation about whether or not that's the right person for the team.
Quick one, Coach. Thank you. What about second chances? What about risks? And you've sort of touched on it, but we see it a lot, particularly in intercollegiate sports, the big football schools, what have you. Mm-hmm. What's your take on that?
So the question is, what is my take on second chances? I am an example of second and third chances. I've made so many mistakes in my life, and people didn't give up on me. I should not be here doing what I'm doing. I shouldn't be at Trinity. I mean, I've really made some horrific mistakes along the way, but I was given second chances. But I learned from my mistakes. So it's fine to give, and you should give people second chances. When we get into this NCAA money-making wheel that's spinning around, or professional sport, then we see a very short leash. An Indianapolis offensive coordinator was fired last night. He was fired because they didn't want to fire the head coach yet. He hadn't done anything wrong. They needed a head on the table. And so I'm a big fan of second and third chances. I think you should encourage your employees to take small risks, but never take a risk that's large enough that it could compromise the organization. That's unacceptable. Insider trading is unacceptable. But push the envelope. You're being paid to push the envelope and learn from your mistakes. The same mistake over and over, what's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing every day and expecting a different outcome. So I'm a big fan in second chances. I think we need to do it. Well, thank you so much for coming in this morning. Diane, thanks for having me.
No, thank you, Coach. That was great.